I want to introduce the main concepts that we'll come across in lesson 1 and also address some of the issues that people tend to have when trying to play this lesson for the first time. Now, the first thing that we'll need is to learn the first 4 notes that we'll be using on this page. So the first one you'll see is going to be a B. It's on the middle line in the staff. And we're going to use our first finger, our index finger, in the left hand to play that B. So like this. And it's going to sound like this. Next up, we've got an A on the second space, and we're going to use our first 2 fingers to play that note right here, and it'll sound like this. Third, we've got our G. It's on the second line. And unsurprisingly, we'll be using this, our 3 fingers in the left hand to play. So like this. And it'll sound like this. And lastly, the 4th note that we'll use is going to be our C. And that's on the 3rd space in the staff. And we're going to use just our middle finger in the left hand. So right here. And the C sounds like this. The next important idea for this lesson is the whole note, or a note that takes up a whole measure. Whole notes are played for 4 full beats, and what it means to have 4 full beats is that when you set your metronome and you're counting along, you want to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, the first beat of the next measure before you stop playing that note. So I'm going to play a whole note on B with the metronome, and I want you to count along at home and see how I keep playing my note until the first beat of the next measure before I stop playing. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. We also have whole rests, and just like a whole note, it's a rest that takes up the whole measure. But since it's a rest, we don't play. So all we'll be doing is counting along with the metronome during that measure. Now at the top of the page, you'll see a bunch of other terms like bar, measure, treble clef, staff. I'm not going to cover those here, but if you want to understand them more fully, go over to musictheory.net, which I'll link below. They've got a bunch of really great lessons explaining that terminology and lots of others. They also have exercises on there, and the one that I always recommend to my students at first is the note identification exercise. And that's great for whenever you learn a new note and you're having trouble recognizing it in the music. It'll get you to be able to recognize those notes faster and more accurately, and it really doesn't take a whole lot, just a couple of minutes every day on the notes that you've learned. There are a few issues that tend to come up when people try to play this lesson for the first time, and the ones that I want to talk about today fall under the categories of fingering, so putting your fingers in the right place at the right time, note reading, and breathing. So firstly, with the fingering issues, I'll see very often that students will attempt to start playing their note before they've put their finger down for whatever note they're trying to play, or they'll pick their finger up before they've stopped playing the note, or a combination of the two. And that might sound like this. So you heard that there was an extra note at the beginning and the end of the note that I was trying to play. So what you want to do is make sure that you have the finger pressed down for the note that you're trying to play long before you start blowing air into the instrument, and that you've stopped blowing air into the instrument long before you pick up your finger at the end of the note. So that'll look like this. The next thing having to do with fingering is you've probably noticed that the saxophone has lots of buttons on it, and they all have some purpose in playing different notes on the instrument. So even though we won't be using these fingers, these keys here, which are very close to your palm in the left hand, and these keys here, which are close to your palm in the right hand, they still are going to make the instrument play a different note than what you're expecting. So you might try to play a B and be really confident that you're doing the correct fingering for that B, but it'll sound weird, like this. Now, if you hear that sound, what's likely happening is that you've accidentally bumped one of these keys, either in the left hand or the right hand. So make sure that when you're putting your hands on the instrument, your fingers have a nice round curve to them to give plenty of space for those other keys that we're not using yet. The last thing I want to mention is we're not using our pinkies yet either. So I'll see a lot of students try to curl those pinkies under the instrument. Now, we do want to use these pinky keys eventually, so if you notice yourself curling those pinkies underneath the instrument, put them right back where they belong on these keys here. Hey guys, I forgot to mention one thing yesterday about fingering, and that's that we want to move our fingers as little as possible. So let's take, for example, going from a B to an A. So B would just be our first finger, and A would be the first two fingers. So since we use the first finger in both the B and the A, there's no need to lift up our fingers in between those two notes. So when we go from the B to the A, we can just push down our second finger in addition to the first finger. And the same goes for lifting fingers up. If we were to go from a G, so the first three fingers, and we wanted to go to a B, well, we're already pressing down our first finger for the B, and all we need to do is lift up our second and third fingers. There's no need to pick everything up and then put them back down for the B natural. Now let's talk about note reading. It's very common at first when you're trying to get these notes to come out correctly to lose focus and let your eyes drift off from whatever song that you're trying to play. And what'll end up happening is you're going to make a lot of mistakes that you didn't need to make because you have no idea what note is coming up next, or maybe which song you're even playing. So it's very important to keep your focus and make sure that your eyes are locked on whatever song that you're trying to play. Not only that, but on this first page, we're only playing whole notes, which means as soon as you start playing that note, you're going to hold it for 4 beats without changing until you get to the next note. That gives you the opportunity to look ahead to the next note. So as soon as you start playing that first note, go ahead and look to the next one and try and figure out what is that note and what is the fingering that I'm going to use to play it. All right, lastly, let's talk about breathing. You might have noticed when you got down to the bottom of the page that you're not actually able to play through those entire songs on one single breath. You might have gotten through maybe 2/3 of the way and realize that you're out of air when you're red in the face and gasping for breath. So what we want to do instead is plan out when we're going to take our breaths. And usually what we want to do is take breaths in 2-measure or 4-measure segments. And you'll notice me doing this in the demonstration videos. Every time I get to the end of every 4th measure, I'm going to take the last beat out of that measure and take a breath. So what that would sound like if we just had 1 measure and took a breath at the end of it, it would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this is a great habit to get into, whether you need that breath or not. All right, that's it for my tips for lesson 1. Go ahead and let me know in the comments below if this was helpful to you or if you have any other questions that I didn't address in the video. This has been Michael Weiss with another video lesson. Until next time, happy practicing.